They pushed me out of the family photo and called me Charity, but they never knew my birth record was hidden in my grandfather's cedar box. When I opened it, their lies, stolen money, and perfect family image all began to fall apart. My name is Maren Holloway, and I was 34. The Christmas Eve Nadine Holloway looked at me in front of a full charity hall and said, "Maren, step aside, sweetheart. This picture is for real family." I had spent 3 days preparing that event, booking the hall, fixing the charity accounts, and making sure every person in that room had a place to sit. But when the photographer lifted his camera, I was pushed beside the coat rack with the donor folder in my hands, while Tessa smiled at the center of the Whitcomb portrait and accepted credit for the fund I had saved from collapse. My brother Reed lifted a glass he had not paid for. My father Gareth looked down at his shoes. And my grandfather Arthur sat in the middle of them all, watching me like he was finally tired of keeping a secret. Before that night ended, he would press an old cedar box into my hands and tell me they had not just stolen my place in the picture. They had stolen my mother's name, my inheritance, and the truth of who I really was. I thought being cropped out of that portrait was the cruelest thing they could do to me. I was wrong. By New Year's morning, a judge would freeze the lake cottage they were trying to sell. Nadine's control over my grandfather's money would be suspended, and 3 people who called me a charity case would wish they had never taught an accountant how to read what they tried to hide. I had been awake since 5 that morning because fear has always made me useful. I do not shout when I am nervous. I make lists. I count chairs. I check receipts twice. I am a forensic bookkeeper in Lincoln, Nebraska, and my job is to follow money after someone has tried to make it disappear politely. Estates, trust accounts, family businesses, old people's savings moved under kind-sounding names. I have learned that greed rarely walks into a room calling itself greed. It calls itself help, care, family, or temporary need. That should have made me look more closely at my own family years earlier, but a person can be brilliant with other people's ledgers and blind at her own table. The Whitcomb Christmas charity dinner was supposed to honor my grandfather Arthur, who had started the fund after my grandmother died. The money helped families with heat, rent, and grocery cards during winter. For months, Nadine had called me whenever the numbers would not balance, whenever donors asked questions, whenever Tessa forgot another deadline. I rebuilt the account records, restored the donor list, corrected the tax forms, and saved the event from embarrassment. Then Nadine printed Tessa's name on the program as chair of the Whitcomb Legacy Fund and left mine off everything except the volunteer sheet. That was how the Holloways had always used me. Tessa got praise. Reed got rescue. I got responsibility. I came to them when I was 2, or that was the story I was given. Nadine said they had taken me in during a difficult time, that I was lucky, that not every child without a proper place ended up with a roof and a family name. Gareth said I should be grateful because many people had less. Reed said it when he wanted something from me. Tessa said it with prettier language. "Maren is basically one of us," she would tell guests, smiling as if basically was not a knife with a ribbon tied around it. I grew up trying to become impossible to throw away. I studied hard. I worked early. I remembered birthdays, washed dishes, balanced family checkbooks, and became the quiet girl adults praised because praising me cost less than loving me. By 34, I had a steady career, a small house, and the terrible habit of still waiting for Nadine to look at me like I had finally earned a permanent chair. So when she told me to step aside for the portrait, it hurt in an old place, but it did not surprise me. The flash went off without me. Tessa held her crystal plaque. Reed laughed too loudly near the bar. Gareth adjusted his tie and gave me the face he always gave when silence was easier than decency. I stood beside the coat rack with the donor folder in my hands and felt something inside me go still. Not broken. I had broken before. This was colder than breaking. This was the moment a woman finally understands that no amount of usefulness will make cruel people honest. I was about to carry coffee back to the hall when Arthur appeared in the side doorway. Since his fall in October, he had been different, softer around the edges, clear some mornings and lost by afternoon. Nadine had taken over his mail, his medicine, his bank statements, his appointments, everything she called keeping things simple. But that night, his eyes were sharp. He looked at me and said, "They told me you did not want to be in the picture." I almost laughed, because some lies are so cruel they become absurd. "Did they?" I asked. He reached into his coat with shaking hands and pulled out a small cedar box tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Take this home," he said. "Lock your door before you open it. If I forget tomorrow, remember tonight for both of us." I asked what it was, but Arthur only pressed the box into my hands and looked over his shoulder like a frightened man in his own life. "It is your mother," he whispered. "And it is the chair they stole from you." Before I could answer, Nadine came into the hallway with her hostess smile stretched tight over anger. Her eyes landed on the cedar box and stayed there. "Dad, there you are," she said. "Tessa wants one more picture with you." Then she looked at me. "What is that?" Arthur straightened as much as an old man with weak knees could. "A Christmas gift for my granddaughter," he said. The word granddaughter hit the hallway harder than a shout. Nadine's smile did not move, but something behind it cracked. "How sweet," she said. "Maren can open it later." I left before dessert, carrying the box under my coat as if it were alive. No one followed me. No one asked if I was okay. That was the purest truth my family ever gave me. At home, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the cedar box with hands that did not feel like mine. Inside were 4 things: a hospital bracelet, an old photograph, a folded letter, and a birth record with the state seal of Nebraska raised in the paper. I opened the birth record first because documents do not soften truth for the person reading it. Child: Maren Elodie Whitcomb. Mother: Elodie Whitcomb. Father: blank. There was no Holloway on that line, no vague kindness, no nameless trouble, no charity story. I had been born a Whitcomb before Nadine ever taught me to feel grateful for breathing in her house. The photograph showed a young woman in a yellow sweater holding a baby against her shoulder. She had my mouth, my hands, and the same serious line between her brows that Tessa used to call my accountant face. On the back, someone had written, "Elodie and Maren, Spring, 1992. I touched my mother's name and felt a grief that was not new, only newly named. The letter was worse because it loved me. "My sweet Maren," it began, and I had to stop and breathe because no one in that house had ever written sweet before my name without wanting something from me. Elodie wrote about working long hours cleaning houses, about Arthur watching me when she could not afford care, about how I frowned at peas and clapped when music played. She wrote like a young woman who was tired but still believed the future owed her a little mercy. Near the end, she wrote the sentence that changed the weight of my entire childhood. "If anything ever happens to me, please make sure my daughter knows she was not an accident, not a burden, not a problem for anyone to solve. She is the best thing I have ever made." Folded beneath the letter was a note from Arthur, dated years earlier. Elodie's savings for Maren, added to by me each year, held in the family account until she is ready. I read it 3 times. My mother had saved money for me, cleaning money, grocery money, small exhausted dollars put aside so I would never feel like charity. And somewhere in the house where I was told to be grateful, that money had been hidden from me. Arthur came to me the next morning with an envelope of statements and the tired shame of a man who had waited too long to do the right thing. He told me Elodie had been his youngest daughter, that she died on an icy road when I was 2, that Nadine and Gareth agreed to raise me only if the truth stayed quiet. Nadine had lost a baby that year, he said, staring at his hands. She said she could not raise another woman's child under another woman's name. I told myself silence would keep peace. It only kept you lonely. Then he told me the part that made my grief useful. Since his fall, papers had appeared in front of him almost every week. Nadine told him where to sign. Gareth said it was routine. Tessa said the family fund needed stability. Reed said nothing, which was often his way of saying yes to whatever benefited him. Arthur's bank statements no longer came to his house. His checkbook was gone. His lake cottage, the one Elodie had loved, was suddenly under contract. "My accounts feel lighter," he said. "I know that sounds foolish." It did not sound foolish to me. It sounded like the beginning of a case. With Arthur's written consent, I began to look. I started with the power of attorney Nadine had obtained in March, 6 weeks after his fall. On its own, a power of attorney is not suspicious. Families use them every day. In honest hands, it is a tool of care. In selfish hands, it is a key to every locked drawer. By April, money had begun leaving Arthur's accounts in clean, round numbers. $27,000 went to a contractor for Nadine and Gareth's kitchen renovation, though Arthur did not live there. $18,000 went toward Tessa's boutique lease, described as community outreach, though I could find no contract, no program, no benefit to the charity fund. $11,500 went to Reed through a cashier's check marked temporary assistance. Smaller transfers paid for dinners, club fees, travel, and things that had nothing to do with Arthur's care. Then I found the account ending in 4419. In February, it held more than $74,000. By Christmas, it held $213. Arthur touched the printed line with one finger and said, "That was hers. Elodie's money. For you." I did not scream. I did not call Nadine. I did not drive to Tessa's boutique and throw papers across her glass counter. That kind of scene would have given them what they understood. Noise, emotion, a woman they could call unstable. Instead, I did what I do for strangers who hire me when their brothers drain estates and their cousins forge signatures. I made a spreadsheet. Date, amount, recipient, memo, source document, note. Every transfer became a row. Every row became part of a story money was telling more honestly than any Holloway ever had. My mother had scrubbed floors so I would not grow up feeling like a burden, and Nadine had spent that money while calling me one. That was not only theft. It was a kind of spiritual cruelty, the sort that does not leave bruises but changes how a child sits in a room. When the first file was ready, I called an elder law attorney named Maribel Cross. She had a downtown office above a bank and a voice that made panic feel inefficient. I told her the facts. She listened, then said, "Bring the documents, your grandfather, and the box. Bring feelings if you must, but bring proof first." Maribel did not promise revenge because good lawyers do not sell revenge. She talked about fiduciary duty, formal accounting, capacity, emergency relief, and suspected elder financial exploitation. She said Nadine's authority under the power of attorney required her to act for Arthur's benefit. not to fund her daughter's boutique, her son's debts, or her own kitchen. She was especially concerned about the lake cottage because the sale was scheduled to close the first week of January. Once sold, it would be harder to recover. The cottage mattered legally because it was an asset. It mattered to me because it was the only place in my childhood that suddenly made sense. I had one strange memory of water, pears in a blue bowl, and a woman laughing in a yellow sweater. Nadine had always told me I invented things because lonely children make stories. Now I knew the truth. I had not invented a memory. My family had buried it. Nadine found out I was asking questions before we were ready. She called me the Friday after Christmas, and her voice had lost the soft public polish she wore at charity dinners. "I hear you have been bothering people about Arthur's accounts," she said. "You need to stop before you embarrass yourself." I looked at the cedar box on my table and felt the old obedient fear rise out of habit, then die from lack of use. "Arthur asked me to review the records," I said. "Maribel Cross is helping us." There was a pause, small but sharp. Nadine knew the name. "Your grandfather is confused," she said. "You are taking advantage of an old man because someone put fairy tales in your head." I placed my hand on the birth record. "No," I said. "I am reading documents." Her voice hardened. "Do not mistake charity for standing, Maren. This is Whitcomb business. This is blood." For the first time in my life, I hung up on her before she could finish putting me back in my box. After that, they moved fast because guilty people often mistake speed for intelligence. Tessa posted a smiling photo with her charity plaque and wrote, "Some people only remember family when money is involved." Reed sent a text that said, "Back off, or everyone will know what you really are." I printed it and added it to the binder. Gareth called once and left a message about handling things privately, which is what weak people call silence when truth becomes inconvenient. Meanwhile, Maribel and I prepared the emergency petition. We asked the court to suspend Nadine's authority, freeze the Lake Cottage sale, order a full accounting of every transaction since March, and appoint a neutral fiduciary to protect Arthur while the court reviewed the records. We attached the transfers, the account summaries, the contractor invoice, the boutique payment, the cashier's check, Arthur's written consent, and Elodie's letter. Maribel warned me they would accuse me of greed. "Do you want to seek the recovered funds for yourself now?" she asked. I looked at my mother's handwriting and shook my head. "First protect him," I said. "First stop them." The order came on New Year's Eve morning. Maribel called while I was standing in my kitchen with coffee gone cold beside my laptop. "The judge granted emergency relief," she said. Nadine's authority under the power of attorney was suspended pending review. The cottage sale was frozen. A formal accounting was ordered. A temporary neutral fiduciary named Helena Voss would control Arthur's bill payment and account access. Adult Protective Services had opened a file. I sat down slowly because justice, when it arrives in real life, does not always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like a locked door finally holding. For months, money had been sliding out of Arthur's life while everyone called it care. Now it had stopped. Elodie's cottage would not be sold that week to cover Tessa's ambition and Reed's mistakes. Arthur would not be handed another paper and told to sign his own disappearance. There was only one thing left. They did not know yet. Nadine had planned the Whitcomb New Year Legacy Gala for January 1st at the country club, a donor celebration meant to crown Tessa as the public face of the family fund. She loved a stage because stages make lies look organized. Relatives, donors, church friends, and a photographer would be there. I was not invited, of course. My name had been removed from the volunteer list the day after I hung up on her, but Arthur was going, and Maribel agreed that if the family wanted witnesses, we should not waste them. I did not plan a scene. I planned a record. I brought the binder, the court order, the birth record, Elodie's letter, and the cedar box. I also baked Elodie's pear and cardamom cake from a recipe Arthur found under the letter. I wanted something of my mother in that room besides paper. Her records and her recipe, her proof and her sweetness, walking in together through the front door they had tried to close on both of us. The ballroom went quiet when I entered. Tessa saw me first and her smile fell. Reed looked down into his glass. Gareth shut his eyes as if shame were whether he could wait out. Nadine stood on stage beneath a banner that read, Whitcomb Legacy, Family, Service, Future. She had been speaking about loyalty when I walked in carrying a cake and a binder like two halves of the same accusation. Maren, she said into the microphone, making my name sound like a stain. This is a private family event. I walked to the front table where Arthur sat with Helena beside him, though no one in my family knew yet who Helena was. That is what you said about the picture, I said, not loudly, but the microphone caught enough. I thought I should bring the document you cannot crop me out of. Nadine came down from the stage fast. Do not do this, she hissed. Before I answered, Arthur pushed himself upright and said, Let her speak. Nadine turned toward him with that careful voice people use on old men they want to control. Dad, you are tired. Arthur looked at her and said, I was tired when I let you hide Elodie's daughter. I am clear now. Elodie's name changed the room. Old neighbors looked at each other. A churchwoman covered her mouth. Gareth's face went gray. I set the cake on the table first, then opened the binder. My name is Maren Elodie Whitcomb, I said. Most of you know me as Maren Holloway because that is the name I was given after my mother died. What I was not given was the truth. My mother was Elodie Whitcomb, Arthur's youngest daughter. I was not taken in from nowhere. I was hidden from somewhere. I laid the birth record on the table, state seal facing up. For 32 years, I was told I lived on charity. Last week, I learned my mother saved money so I would never have to feel like charity at all. This year, that account was drained. Nadine laughed once, but it broke in the middle. This is disgusting, she said. You want money. I turned the first page of the binder. No, I said. I came because money already left. Then I read the numbers. Not with anger. Anger would have helped them. I read them the way I read any case file, plain and slow enough that every person in the room could follow. April 3rd, $27,000 from Arthur Whitcomb's care account to Prairie Home Contractors for a renovation at Nadine and Gareth Holloway's residence. April 18th, $18,000 toward Tessa Holloway's boutique lease, described as community outreach, with no contract showing benefit to the fund. May 9th, $11,500 to Reed Holloway by cashier's check, marked temporary assistance, with no repayment terms. Between June and November, additional transfers totaling $19,400 for expenses unrelated to Arthur's care. Tessa stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. You do not understand business, she snapped. Maribel spoke from behind me, calm as a closed courtroom door. Then you will have a chance to provide documentation in the formal accounting. Tessa sat down as if someone had cut the string holding her up. Nadine reached for the only weapon she had used on me my whole life. After everything we did for you, she said, louder now, because people like her confuse volume with innocence. We fed you. We raised you. We gave you a name. You were a kindness, Maren, not a daughter. A kindness. Once, Those words would have made me 12 years old again, standing outside a family room with my hands full of dishes. Now I reached into the cedar box and lifted Elodie's letter. "You are right about one thing," I said. "I was not your daughter. I was hers, and she loved me before you taught me to feel unwanted." I read only 2 lines because some things are too sacred to spend on people who cannot afford them. Please make sure my daughter knows she was not an accident, not a burden, not a problem for anyone to solve. She is the best thing I have ever made. My voice shook, but it held. Arthur began to cry openly. From the back of the room, Evelyn Pike, an old neighbor from the lake, whispered, "She has Elodie's hands." And for once, no one corrected the truth. Nadine moved toward the binder then, fast and desperate, as if scattering the pages could turn proof back into gossip. Maribel stepped between us and placed a slim folder on the table. "I would not touch that," she said. "Everything Miss Whitcomb has referenced is already filed with the court." Miss Whitcomb, not Holloway, not Charity, not basically family. On December 31st, Maribel continued, the court issued a temporary order suspending Nadine Holloway's authority under the power of attorney, freezing the pending sale of the lake cottage, and requiring a full accounting of transactions made from Arthur Whitcomb's account since March. Adult Protective Services has opened a report, and Helena Voss has been appointed temporary neutral fiduciary. No one in this family may move another dollar of Arthur's money while the court reviews the record. Silence filled the ballroom so completely that I could hear the photographer lower his camera. There were no screams then, not from me. Reed sank into his chair. Tessa stared at the plaque in front of her like it had become evidence. Gareth looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Nadine stood in the center of the room she had built to display her goodness and discovered there was no speech polished enough to cover a court order. Arthur reached for my hand. I took it, and he said loudly enough for the donors and relatives to hear, "I want my accounts handled by someone with no child at this table and no reason to lie. I want Helena watching every dollar. And I want the record to show Maren asked for nothing except that I be protected." I turned to the room because families rewrite women who embarrass them if no witnesses are present. "I am not asking for the cottage," I said. "I am not asking for the inheritance. I am not here to take what is left. I came because someone had to stand between this man and the people emptying him, and it turned out the Charity case was the only one keeping receipts." Arthur looked at the photographer then, the same man who had cropped me out on Christmas Eve, and said, "Take the picture again. This time my granddaughter stands beside me." Nadine made a sound like a door failing to close. Reed refused to stand. Tessa walked out. Gareth stayed where he was, ashamed and useless. But Arthur sat at the center, Helena on one side because protection had earned its place, and me on the other because truth had finally entered the frame. The cake sat in front of us, warm and plain and more honest than every speech Nadine had given. When the flash went off, I did not feel accepted by the Holloways. I felt free of them. That is not the same thing. It is better. The ending was not movie revenge. No one was dragged out in handcuffs. No one confessed with perfect timing. Real consequences move through hearings, accountings, repayment plans, and invitations that stop arriving. The formal accounting confirmed most of what my binder had shown and found smaller withdrawals I had missed. Some money came back. Tessa's boutique lost its lease when the financial mess became public in the circles she cared about most. Reed entered a repayment agreement and stopped pretending his debts were temporary. Nadine was permanently removed from Arthur's finances, and the Adult Protective Services file became the kind of quiet mark a woman like her could never polish away. Gareth sent one letter months later. He wrote that he had loved Elodie and failed me because he wanted peace. I did not answer. Peace built on a child's erasure is not peace. It is only a quieter kind of violence. Arthur stayed in his house, and the lake cottage stayed unsold. Helena Voss managed his accounts with the warmth of a locked safe, which was exactly what the situation required. Bills were paid, caregivers were hired. The charity fund was audited and rebuilt without Holloway hands inside it. Maribel told me I could pursue recovery of Elodie's savings for myself, and maybe one day I will. Not because I want Nadine's money, but because my mother's work deserves to be named correctly. For now, I kept the cedar box, the birth record, the letter, and the recipe card. I also went to the lake cottage with Arthur on one of his clear mornings. Evelyn Pike met us there with old photographs she had saved because, as she said, your mother deserved not to vanish just because the living were uncomfortable. In one picture, Elodie stood on the dock in that yellow sweater with me on her hip and pears in a blue bowl beside her. I looked at it for a long time and understood that I had not lost my place in the family. My place had been stolen, hidden, and finally returned by paper, memory, and an old man's late courage. The next Christmas Eve, I did not attend Nadine's dinner. I did not wait for an invitation. I did not set a chair for people who had spent my life teaching me to stand. I set my own table instead. Arthur came with his caregiver and fell asleep after dessert with a blanket over his knees. Evelyn came and told me stories about Elodie until the woman in the photographs began to feel less like a ghost and more like a mother who had been delayed. Maribel came with a bottle of wine and pretended she had no feelings about holidays, badly. A friend from work brought flowers and did not ask why I cried when I cut the pear and cardamom cake. No one at that table needed me to earn my chair. No one called me lucky for being fed. No one cropped me out and called it family. I used to think belonging was the moment cruel people finally made room for you in their portrait. I know better now. Sometimes belonging is an old cedar box. Sometimes it is a dead woman's handwriting reaching you 32 years late. Sometimes it is a judge's order, a clean ledger, a lawyer's calm voice, and the first picture where nobody has the power to push you aside. Nadine once told me the picture was for real family. In the end, she was right. That was why I never should have stepped aside in the first place. Before we go deeper into Maren's story, I want you to think about one simple question. Have you ever been in a room where people needed you, but they did not truly want you? Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, painful way where you are allowed to help, allowed to carry the weight, allowed to fix the problem. But when the real family moment comes, you are gently moved to the side. That is exactly where this story begins. And honestly, that is what makes it so painful. Nadine does not slap Maren. She does not scream at her in the opening scene. She simply says, "Step aside, sweetheart. This picture is for real family." In my opinion, that line is more cruel than a loud insult because it is dressed like manners. It sounds polite enough that outsiders may not understand the wound, but Maren understands it immediately. She has been hearing different versions of that sentence her whole life. This is why the opening works so well emotionally. The family portrait is not just a photo. It is a symbol of Maren's entire position in that family. She is close enough to organize the event, close enough to fix the charity accounts, close enough to make sure every guest has a chair, but not close enough to stand in the picture. And I think many people will feel this scene because sometimes rejection does not come through a locked door. Sometimes the door is open, but you are still not allowed to sit in the right place. Sometimes people call you family when they need your work, but suddenly remember blood, status, and boundaries when praise or inheritance is involved. What I personally like about Maren as a character is that she does not instantly become loud. She does not react in a cheap, dramatic way. She does not create a public scene just because she has been humiliated. She stands there, she absorbs it, and something inside her becomes cold. That is a very mature emotional reaction. Sometimes when a person has been hurt for years, the final insult does not make them explode. It makes them clear. It removes the last small hope they were still protecting. For Maren, being cropped out of that photograph is not only embarrassment, it is the moment she finally sees the family system without excuses. Tessa gets credit. Reed gets comfort. Gareth gets to hide in silence. Nadine controls the story. And Maren gets the work. Now, let's talk about Nadine, because I think she is a very realistic villain. She is not written like a cartoon. She does not walk around announcing that she is evil. She understands image. She understands charity dinners, speeches, photographs, family reputation, and soft public language. This kind of person can be very dangerous because they know how to look kind while being cruel in private. Nadine's power is not only money. Her real power is narrative. She decides who counts as family. She decides who gets credit. She decides which truth can be spoken and which truth must be buried. And for years, everyone around her allows it because challenging Nadine would cost them comfort. Gareth, in my opinion, is one of the most frustrating people in the story. Nadine is openly controlling, but Gareth is quietly cowardly. And sometimes cowardice does as much damage as cruelty. He may not be the one saying the worst lines, but he stands there while they are said. He looks down. He adjusts his tie. He chooses silence again and again. I think this is important because in many toxic families, the damage is not done by one person alone. It is protected by the people who do not want drama. They call their silence peace, but really it is permission. Gareth's failure is that he knows enough to feel shame, but not enough to act. Tessa and Reed also show different faces of entitlement. Tessa takes Maren's work and wears it like an achievement. She accepts public praise for a fund Maren repaired. She understands how to look polished, how to stand in the center, how to become the face of something she did not build. Reed is less polished, but equally selfish. He takes rescue after rescue and treats family money like a private emergency account. Together, they show us what happens when people grow up believing someone else will always clean the mess. And Maren has been that person. She has been the cleaner, the fixer, the responsible one, the woman who carries the folder while someone else holds the plaque. The cedar box changes the whole story because it gives Maren something her family never gave her: truth. I love that the proof does not come through a flashy twist. It comes through an old box, a faded ribbon, a birth record, a photograph, and a letter. These are quiet objects, but they carry enormous emotional weight. The birth record tells the legal truth. The photograph gives Maren a face to belong to. The hospital bracelet proves she had a real beginning before Nadine's version of the story. But Elodie's letter is the heart of everything. When Maren reads that her mother did not see her as a burden, it directly fights the lie Nadine planted in her childhood. That is not just information. That is emotional rescue arriving 32 years late. And honestly, Elodie's saved money is one of the saddest parts of the story. It was not only an account, it was a mother's effort turned into numbers. Every small amount saved from cleaning houses meant something. It meant, my daughter will not have to beg. It meant, my daughter will not feel like charity. It meant, even if I cannot give her everything, I will give her one thing that proves she was loved. So when Nadine drains that account, she is not just stealing money. She is stealing the one gift Elodie left to protect Maren from shame. That is why the financial betrayal feels so personal. The dollars matter, but the meaning behind them matters more. Arthur is complicated, and I like that the story allows him to be complicated. He is loving, but he is also guilty. He tells the truth, but very late. He protects Maren in the present, but he failed to protect her in the past. I think that makes him more human. In real life, people are rarely perfect heroes or perfect villains. Sometimes someone loves you and still fails you. Sometimes they are weak at the exact moment you needed them to be brave. Arthur's courage matters, especially because he is old, vulnerable, and being financially controlled. But his regret also matters. When he gives Maren the cedar box, he is not only giving her documents, he is finally returning a truth he should never have allowed to be taken. The financial exploitation angle gives the story its real revenge engine. Without it, this would only be a family secret story. But with the money trail, the story becomes a legal reckoning. Nadine used Arthur's power of attorney to move money where it did not belong. She helped Tessa. She helped Reed. She improved her own house. She tried to sell the lake cottage. And all of this was done while Arthur was vulnerable and while Maren's real inheritance account was being emptied. This is why Maren's profession matters so much. She is not randomly powerful. Her strength comes from the exact skill her family overlooked. She knows how to read money. She knows how to follow dates. She knows how to turn confusion into evidence. In my opinion, this is the most satisfying kind of revenge because it does not depend on luck. Maren does not suddenly find a secret mansion. She does not become rich overnight. She does not defeat them with some unrealistic trick. She uses discipline. She uses paperwork. She uses consent, statements, account summaries, legal advice, and court process. That may sound less glamorous, but it feels stronger because it is believable. And there is a lesson here for the audience. When people manipulate stories, emotions alone may not be enough. You need records. You need dates. You need proof. A calm person with documentation can be more dangerous than an angry person with a speech. Maribel Cross adds another powerful layer. She is not there to make Maren more dramatic. She is there to make Maren more precise. I like that she does not promise revenge. She gives structure. She explains fiduciary duty, emergency relief, formal accounting, and court orders. This makes the story feel grounded. It also shows that real justice often looks boring before it becomes powerful. It is not always thunder and confrontation. Sometimes it is a stamped petition. Sometimes it is a freeze order. Sometimes it is a neutral fiduciary with no emotional connection to the family. That kind of justice is quiet, but it is hard to argue with. The gala scene is the emotional payoff because Nadine's own stage becomes the place where her image collapses. That is beautiful storytelling. Nadine loves public respect. She loves being seen as the devoted daughter, the charity woman, the family leader. So it is fitting that the truth reaches her in public. Maren does not create the stage. Nadine does. Maren simply walks into it with the documents. That is why the scene feels fair. Nadine wanted witnesses for her fake legacy. Maren gives her witnesses for the real accounting, and I think that is a very satisfying reversal. What makes Maren powerful in that ballroom is not just what she says, it is how she says it. She reads the numbers calmly. She does not beg people to believe her. She does not over-explain her pain. She does not chase Nadine emotionally. She lets the record speak. And that matters because Nadine's main defense is performance. Nadine knows how to sound offended. She knows how to act wounded. She knows how to say, "After everything we did for you." But performance cannot erase a transfer. It cannot erase a court order. It cannot erase a birth record. That is the moment the power shifts completely. Nadine's repeated line, "You were a kindness, not a daughter," is important because it shows that she has only one real weapon. She wants to return Maren to the old identity. She wants Maren to shrink back into gratitude and shame. But the line fails because Maren is no longer the same woman who first heard it. This is something I find very true emotionally. Sometimes people keep using an old insult because they do not realize you have outgrown the wound. They think the same words will still control you. But healing changes the listener. Nadine says the same sentence, but Maren now has Elodie's letter, Arthur's truth, legal proof, and her own self-respect. The insult no longer has a place to land. The second photograph is one of the strongest symbolic moments. At the beginning, Maren is removed from the family picture. At the end, Arthur says, "Take the picture again. This time my granddaughter stands beside me." That is not just a sweet moment. It is the story correcting its first wound. The woman who was cropped out returns with a document no one can crop. That is why the line works so well. It connects humiliation, identity, and revenge in one image. The first photograph was a lie. The second photograph is a record. But I also respect that Maren does not become greedy. She tells the room she is not asking for the cottage or the inheritance. She came to protect Arthur. This is important because it keeps her morally strong. If she had walked in only to claim money, Nadine's accusation would have more power. But Maren's motive is clean. She wants the abuse stopped. She wants the truth recorded. She wants Arthur protected by someone neutral. And yes, she also wants her mother's name restored. That is not greed. That is dignity. The ending is calm, but it is not weak. Some people may expect revenge stories to end with arrests, screaming, or complete destruction. But I actually think this ending is more mature. Nadine loses control, Tessa loses status, Reed faces repayment. Gareth is left with the shame of his silence. Arthur is protected. The lake cottage is saved. Elodie's memory returns. Maren stops begging for a chair. That is enough. In stories like this, the deepest victory is not always watching the villains suffer loudly. Sometimes the deepest victory is watching the heroine become free quietly. And the final table scene is where the story becomes healing instead of only revenge. Maren does not spend the next Christmas waiting for Nadine's invitation. She builds her own table. That is such an important emotional choice. Many people stay trapped because they keep hoping the same people who wounded them will one day provide the healing. But Maren learns that belonging does not have to come from the people who denied it. She chooses Arthur, Evelyn, Maribel, her friend, and people who sit with her without making love feel like debt. That is not a smaller family. That is a healthier one. So, in my view, this story is really about three things: identity, evidence, and release. Identity, because Maren learns she was never the burden they named her. Evidence, because truth becomes powerful when it is documented. Release, Because Maren finally stops auditioning for a family that benefited from keeping her insecure. The revenge is satisfying, yes, but the real victory is internal. Nadine loses authority over Arthur's money, but she also loses authority over Maren's self-image. That is the bigger loss. If you are listening to this and you have ever been treated like Maren, I want you to take one thing from her story. Do not confuse being needed with being loved. Do not confuse being included in work with being included in family. And do not let people use your kindness as proof that you do not deserve boundaries. Maren's mistake was not that she cared. Caring was never the problem. The problem was giving loyal service to people who used loyalty as a leash. And if this story made you think about an older person in your family, please take that seriously. When someone suddenly controls an elderly person's bank statements, mail, signatures, property, or medical decisions, do not ignore it just because they use the language of care. Care has transparency. Control has excuses. Care welcomes questions. Control gets angry when someone asks for records. That difference can protect someone before the damage becomes permanent. For me, the most powerful message of this story is simple. The truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a cedar box. Sometimes it arrives in a ledger. Sometimes it arrives through an old man's trembling hands, a dead mother's letter, a lawyer's calm voice, and a woman who finally stops stepping aside. Maren thought she needed a place in their picture to belong. In the end, she learned that the picture was never the prize. The prize was knowing who she was, protecting the person who needed her, and building a table where nobody had to earn the right to sit down.